But we're the men and women following freedom's trail, following where the truth leads, we will prevail.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the dark night of tyranny. I'm Dr. Rima Reports, MD. With me, of course, here on the Dr. Rima Reports is my co-host, Ralph Fusatola. We have come to a time when our statement at the Natural Solutions Foundation that freedom is indivisible, that there is no such thing as health freedom without civil freedom, that statement has proved prophetic. And we are now enmeshed in a situation brought to us on Friday when, as Ralph says, everyone in Washington was trying to get out, which is what happens on Fridays in Washington. We are now in a situation where if the presidential or imperial edict goes into play, we have literally no freedoms left. None. We are in a crisis time. We've been in urgent situations. We've been in emergencies. We are now in a high-level crisis. Ralph Fusatola, our co-host every show here on the Dr. Rima Reports, is, of course, both an attorney and a legal scholar. Tell us what's happened.
All right, let's start with what happened on March 16, 2012, which was, of course, predicated on the National Defense Authorization Act that Congress adopted a few weeks ago, a bill that we warned people about. It had many bad clauses in it. Well, it authorizes the president to essentially take over the civilian economy. And on March 16th, the White House issued an executive order, the National Defense Resources Preparedness Order, which implements that new power. What General Bert said about it on our emergency e-blast that we sent out late last night, General Bert's analysis was pretty straightforward, and I'm going to read that. I think it's well worth. He says the so-called National Defense Resources Preparedness Order is a clear blueprint for total government control over the civilian economy under the guise of national defense. He said that this latest outrage against the Constitution reminds him of the totalitarian world of Orwell's 1984, where a few ministries controlled everything. And General Bert is fairly, straight on and correct about that. In my analysis, and I've read the executive order. It is, of course, written in bureaucratese, and there are those who would say that perhaps there are fudge factors in it. But let's look at the actual words. And the actual words are that that the White House claims to have authority to commandeer all the resources of all the people in the country, all the resources in the following areas, as specifically listed: food, energy, health, civil transportation, water, and all other materials, services, and facilities. Those words are exact quotes from the regulation. In a little more detail, Section 201 of the regulation says, priorities and allocations authorities. This is all about allocating priorities. And it says that the authority of the president conferred by a certain statute, the NDAA, to require, now listen to these words, acceptance and priority performance. So the president can order someone to accept and give priority performance of contracts or orders, other than contracts of employment, to promote the national defense, so it has to be for the national defense, over performance of any other contracts or orders, and to allocate materials, services, and facilities as deemed necessary. Now, that's the authority he claims. the authority to order a government agency, a private person, a private company, who knows, an individual, to accept a contract, not a contract from government necessarily, but a contract from some crony corporatist perhaps. So it's any person.
Say Halliburton.
Yeah, any person can be required to accept any contract over and above any other contracts they may have. And that power that he claims is now being delegated. And it's being delegated to 6 specific, is it 6? Yeah, it's 6 specific departments. The Department of Agriculture, with respect to food resources, the Secretary of Energy, with respect to all forms of energy, that was the Secretary of Agriculture, by the way, not the department. It's the Secretary. This is personal authority being granted to the Secretary of each of these departments. The Secretary of Health and Human Services with respect to health resources. The Secretary of Transportation with respect to all forms of civil transportation. The Secretary of Defense with, and get this, water resources. And finally, the Secretary of Commerce with respect to all other materials, services, facilities, including construction materials. This is the order. It basically authorizes these agencies to act in this manner in the interest of the national defense, supposed. And of course, the emergency is always available. So when will they start issuing these orders? Very good question. The FBI got the authority to issue national security letters to require turning over of records without search warrants, essentially, after the 9/11 events. And that authority was supposed to be used to deal with threats to national security, terrorism, and that sort of thing. A few hundred of those letters have been issued for those issues. Many tens of thousands of those letters have been issued in ordinary criminal cases. So when will the authority start? Soon. Dr. Rima, were you offline?
I was.
Well, I just finished basically reading the language from the executive order, because you have to hear the actual language, and you've seen it, of course. And I went through the list of the 6. Somehow we said 5, but it's actually 6 departments that have total government control over the civilian economy. And the question I was raising, as you were off air, was the following. When are they going to start issuing these orders? Now, we know from recent history that the FBI got the authority to issue national security letters to get information back after 9/11. And and they have, in fact, issued a few hundred of those letters about terrorism suspects, but they've issued tens of thousands in ordinary criminal cases. So once the authority was granted, only to be used for in the emergency, of course, it becomes the ordinary thing to use.
But I want to point out, Ralph, that there already is an emergency. On November 23rd, 2000, and if memory serves, 9, remember we were in a phony level 6 pandemic,
right,
courtesy of the pharmacy-driven World Health Organization. There was a 2-part declaration of emergency, and one part was never canceled or repealed. We are still technically living in a state of national emergency. So the children.
I'm sorry to say, Dr. Rima, you're breaking up badly.
Of this chilled my blood is that we already are in a state of national emergency.
Indeed.
There's no question about that. They have all the structures necessary to basically do anything they want. And as we have said over and over and over, health, freedom, is part of the overall freedom structure. Freedom is indivisible. Now, tell people what this means potentially for their daily lives, for their business conduct, for their schooling, for their freedom of movement, for their ability to own a car and drive it where they like. Because frankly, we wrote some years ago about the Model States Preparedness Act, which was focused around the issues of vaccination. And under the States Preparedness Act, the states would have the power to come into your home, seize your car, seize your material property, send you to a concentration camp, require that you accept their work order, do anything that they wanted. This, to me, sounds like another terrifying iteration of the same system. That system is, I'm the state, you're a slave. This is precisely what we've been warning against.
Exactly. I'm making sure that the people who are on the program are able to, on the chat, are able to get at the information. So I'm about to post the link to the e-blast that we sent out late last night that discusses this on the chat window. And this is the access to the executive order. Now, what does an executive order actually do? Well, let's talk about that. Executive orders are binding on the executive department of the federal government. That's what they're binding on. They're not, law by themselves. They get enforced in various ways, but they're essentially orders from the president to the rest of the bureaucracy. In this case, an actual passing of authority from the president to some of his chief officers. The analogy that General Bert gave us to the great ministries in the novel 1984 is an apt one. We're seeing the consolidation of authority over the civilian economy in the hands of these 6 federal agencies, the super agencies, if you will. These are, I guess, the super czars. And we're seeing also something else. It's what was called back in the early years of the Soviet Union war communism. Lenin, in his efforts to turn Russia from what it was into a Soviet society, imposed a series of changes on that society, using crisis after crisis to ratchet up government control over everyone's lives. And one of the things he did was, during the Civil War, he created what he called war communism, which was the militarization of the civil economy for the purpose of marshaling the resources needed to put down the widespread revolt against the dictatorship from the center. And he used a theory of controlling what he called the commanding heights of the economy through the central bureaucracy, and that's exactly what we see being implemented in this particular executive order. We see the playbook, the Leninist playbook, if you will, being played out in the United States, and that's something that we should pay attention to. Now, what we've done is we've set up a specific action item that you can go to if you go to the, and I'll post the action item right now. And Dr. Rima, you were about to say something? Excuse me.
Yeah, I was about to say that we've had urgent situations before. We have never, ever faced anything this urgent. Never. Not with the pandemic, not when 3.5 million emails went out to our decision makers, forcing them to back off, successfully forcing them to back off the mandatory swine flu vaccination. That was an emergency. This is, I don't know how to tell you how urgent this is. You see, we're already in a state of national emergency 3, 4, 5 times over. Martial law was never undeclared in President Lincoln's time. Various emergency states are continued, and this language has been prepared for. Is our government capable of creating another false flag? In a heartbeat. Is our government ready with FEMA camps that have been activated? We told you about that some months ago. Contracts were let to have FEMA camps operating in 48 hours. That's a reality. The United States military has been recruiting and training what we published a poster for, internment and relocation specialists. It's like not one spider web, but a series of interlocking, interconnecting, mutually supporting spider webs designed to catch us all. And I'm telling you folks, if you have ever felt imperiled, if you have ever felt that your freedom was threatened, if you have ever felt that the shit was about to hit the fan, not the proverbial fan, the fan that controls every aspect of your lives, you weren't even close to the level of urgency that you should be feeling now. So my question is, what are we going to do about it? This is the shift in government that we've all been fearing and that we've been seeing incrementally prepared. Health freedom is part of this. Understand, you can be told that you must work for the government. You must cancel your civilian contracts. You must abandon your ordinary job. Is that slave labor? I don't know. What would you call it?
All right, Dr. Rima. That is indeed true. Now,
and you know what scares me?
Go ahead.
I'll tell you what scares me. We have an enormous email list. We are the largest health freedom organization in the world. There should be, based on the emergency blast that we sent out yesterday, there should be more people than our radio system can handle on this show. But because it wasn't sexy and because it wasn't titillating, we have a small group of people who understand what this is about, and I congratulate you people for being there. But where are the rest of you? Now, we are, if you will, a small band of brothers, gender irrelevant. We are a small band of brothers. We know people, and they know people, and they know people. My friends, each of you has been anointed and appointed by me today as Paul Revere. The fascists are coming. The fascists are coming. And I suggest you get on your electronic horse or mouse, depending on what you ride. I ride a mouse. I suggest you get on your electronic steed and you go charging down the streets of our electronic Boston. Our community is global. Our ability to connect is massive. Because if you don't do this, you cannot hold your head up and say, I was part of the Freedom Brigade. I stopped this. This is a call to action, not a call to arms. Let's be practical here. They have the arms. They have the rules that say that if we use our arms in a way that some people tell me they're ready to do, then we are terrorists, we are this, we are that. We are not inciting to arms. We are inciting to action. And the actions must be legal and peaceful and carry the energy of correct intent. This is critically important. We have come to a precipice. What are we going to do? Are we going to stand at the edge of that precipice and be pushed over by the military organization behind us, pushing us forward into the abyss? Or are we going to turn around and say, this is my land, this is my constitution, these are my rights, this is my body, these are my children, these are my parents, this is my house, this is my career, these are my rights. Literally, the choice is up to you.
Indeed, Dr. Rima. Indeed.
So what can we, the ordinary people, do?
Well, first of all, one of the things we need to do is get people to take the action item viral. That tinyurl.com pushback free leads you to an action item that gets messages to decision makers saying that you don't want them to shred your constitutional rights through these bills, regulations, and now executive orders. And it lists specifically not just this new executive order, but also the various laws and regulations that have been imposed in the past number of months that all together add up to a major assault on our remaining constitutional rights.
You know what I'd like to do?
Yes.
I'd like to give out your phone number and have people call so that we can talk with them. After all, we are a community of free men and women, and we have no choice but to communicate actively, successfully, and creatively with one another, and then with the powers that they
That's an excellent idea. May I suggest, I don't know if Sharry Edwards is available right now. I think she's maybe on the call. If Sharry's available, she had some information to share about the topic last week that you might want to deal with for a few minutes and then bring callers in.
Sure.
It is relevant, of course, on the level of how do we respond to these threats to our health and freedom. I don't know, Sharry, I believe you might be on Skype with us right now.
I hope I am.
Yes, you are. Hello, Sharry. All right. I'm going to get a cup of coffee while you guys talk.
Rima, you asked me to check on oxytocin receptors and what was really going on with that, and I sort of started with getting my toes wet, and I think now that I might be over my head.
All right.
In looking at this oxytocin and the receptors and what they can really do with this particular frequency, and people can look this up on the internet because I just didn't quite, I didn't believe it. Oxytocin, nasally administered, reports to reduce fear, and they're doing experiments on soldiers. Certain learning and memory functions are impaired in using oxytocin, and they're using that on prisoners as a experiment, I guess you'd say. When you look at this, it increases trust and allows you to become very docile and not respond. Now, the article that Rima wrote was about autism and how significantly lower levels of oxytocin in the blood cause autistic children. Well, there's another step to that completely that just blew my socks off. When I looked at the receptors of oxytocin, because here is a chemical in your system, but you must have a receptor to accept that chemical. And one of the receptors, if you do not have enough of it, it kicks in the Down syndrome gene. So there may just be as we are given or provided this by frequency or nasal spray or however they're doing it, there may be a tremendous increase in Down syndrome. And then I found out that the activator of oxytocin is the same frequency as adrenaline. So if somebody can yell and scream and whatever and cause an adrenaline rush in a soldier, it activates this oxytocin receptor so that more oxytocin is dropped in and they become more brutal soldiers because they fear nothing.
Very interesting.
It's not only interesting, I'm thinking, how does this fit in with attachment, oxytocin being the molecule of attachment? And what it says to me is that the brain is a web. The brain is not a linear function. And everything is connected, well, the entire reality of our physicalness and our psychological and energetic and emotional selves, it's all a web. And what I'm hearing is that a good emotion gone bad, as I was saying last week, that if you have too many oxytocin molecules, the receptors become deaf in the autistic person, and they cannot express emotion because that system's been shut down. If you have too much energy of attachment, you can become attached to an idea, like the people standing in front of me are bad people, and therefore I have to gun them down even though they're 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 7 and 12-year-old children. So what you're saying is that too much of this receptor energy will shut down the newest, most vulnerable and loosely wired in parts of the brain, the rational, cognitive, and higher emotional centers of the right and left hemispheres, and the more primitive parts of the brain become dominant. The limbic system, the reticular activating system, the instinctual parts, which are not tempered by that latest development, our higher brain. That's what I'm hearing you say while you talk about the frequency, Sharry. And I wanted to share a corroborating input. Now, I have not heard this information from Sharry people. This is new response to new information. But what she's saying is of more than massive significance. Please go on. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did want to share that this fits in with everything that I know neurologically, neurophysiologically, and neuropsychiatrically.
This is incredibly manipulative of the government. But the same frequency of depleted uranium kicks in more oxytocin. An overabundance of oxytocin.
Whoa! Please give us that information in a little bit more detail, because there are a lot of people now whose heads are going, whoa, 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 whoa. What? Please step that down into little chunks for us.
In a war zone, there's a lot of ammunition going off. And one of the things that soldiers are coming back and having a problem with is they are absolutely incredibly toxic with depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is the same frequency as stimulating oxytocin. So I don't know who made this up, but letting those guns and ammunition go off increases a lack of fear in soldiers. Who put that together? That's just incredible to me. And when they're in that zone, that war zone, if they can cause more adrenaline to be pumped, more oxytocin drops in. And as I'm looking at the numbers, some of the numbers match with Gardasil. So a susceptibility to Gardasil, they give you the shots of Gardasil boys and girls alike. I couldn't figure out why they wanted to give boys Gardasil, 9-year-old boys. And when you really push them, it's because this 9-year-old boy may come in contact sexually, orally, with an older man or woman who has these cervical warts. And I was thinking, why would they want these 9-year-old boys? And it's the first dose. It's the first way to manipulate through oxytocin, because the Gardasil shots are the same frequency as the genome for oxytocin. Now that's just manipulation down to our cells.
Well, what that tells us, that's very interesting information. What that tells us is that they are not using frequency to manipulate this. Otherwise, they wouldn't need the shot. Although, of course, it's always nice to have another profit stream.
Right.
Yes. There are some antidotes.
Yes.
B12, make sure your B12 is up and running. Ascorbic acid and linolenic acid, and to some extent alanine, which is an amino acid. Those are the antidotes, the frequency antidotes I found. But at the same time, with these shots, are these antidotes going to work, or is it just going to make it more obvious? They are preparing our children for war when they are 9 years old and up.
Wow.
I wrote to Ralph last night and I said, we may be dead by the end of the day for releasing this information, because it is so absolutely incredible. It's beyond the notion of manipulation that they would take our boys and girls and give them these Gardasil shots in preparation for them laying down their life in a war situation by trusting the people, by bonding to the people that scare them or cause their adrenaline to rush. Now, you cause the adrenaline to rush, and the bonding happens.
Think of how this links into the computer game culture.
Oh my God, Ralph, I never thought of that. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. As a child psychiatrist, I was writing 30 years ago, 20 years ago, about the dangers of Sesame Street, of children's television, and of then, as they came to children, of video games, because they are training for drone killing. They are training for emotionless war activities. Our guest is Clint Richardson, and he has some very, very important information exactly apropos of this this discussion. And are we having technical difficulties? You bet. I want to point out that if we had done a pre-recorded show, let's say on Thursday, we wouldn't be having this discussion. That's the virtue and the value and the vulnerability of live radio, because this happened on Friday. What happened? Well, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to the Dr. Rima Reports. I'm Rima Lebo, MD, the medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, and with me, of course, is my co-host, Ralph Fusatola. Ralph is, as you all know, an attorney and a scholar of both history and the law, and we are talking about not only the National Defense Preparedness Order, which is an imperial edict seizing control of all resources, all activities, all behaviors, all modes of transportation, all food, everything for the state. We are also talking about how we are being prepared for both war and submission by frequency and by vaccine and by toxicity and the depletion of our food. This is no idle chit-chat. our wonderful colleague and collaborator, Sharry Edwards of Sound Health, has been talking about the frequency of oxytocin. Oxytocin, the molecule that induces labor, the molecule that induces mother's milk to flow when the baby's cry is heard or the mother thinks about the baby being hungry, quite literally. Oxytocin, it turns out, is also, or the receptors are also triggered by adrenaline. Well, that makes sense. When you're having sex, your emotions of connection are enhanced, but that connection can be turned to destructiveness. In a situation where people are screaming at soldiers, go out there and kill, kill, kill. What happens is that the oxytocin receptors are activated, the molecules are flooded, and the flooding literally shuts off the higher mental processing. Like, but those children are not my enemies, but that's a bad thing to do. I don't believe in that. Or, I'm not really fighting for anything other than corporate dominance here. Why would I go put my life on the line? People don't have a chance to think that way. That's how brain flooding works. And Sharry pointed out, she's unfortunately no longer available, and that's a real pity. We'll have to learn much more from her. But Sharry pointed out that
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Oh, okay. Well then, why don't you continue to point out how our children are being prepared for war after I ask Ralph, do
Yes.
we have Clint online?
I believe we do. Clint, are you online? Well, it says he's live.
Yes.
Yes, all right.
That was my fault that time.
Good morning. Good morning, Clint.
Good.
Sharry, I know that your time is limited, but let me ask Clint to introduce himself and tell people what, in his own words and voice, why it is so appropriate that he be on the show today after this disastrous edict issued from the Imperial Forbidden Palace in Washington.
Yes.
Please tell us who you are, Clint.
I'm actually just a person who used to be in the Hollywood area doing sound for movies and games and stuff like that, and I actually quit to do my own documentaries. But what I wanted to say about what you're talking about today, it's funny because my next film that I had planned on doing, where I have all the research, is exactly about national emergencies and what they actually mean. And you're absolutely correct that we have been in a state of national emergency, specifically since 1933, when President Roosevelt declared that national emergency then, and of course since Lincoln. But really, when we got to get down to the nitty gritty, it's really since Roosevelt. Congress met. Congress takes full advantage of this as well. It's not like they're innocent in this. They met in 1973 in a committee called the Special Committee on Termination of the National Emergency, where they basically decided that they needed to keep all of the national emergencies. And I would just like to read you an excerpt from that, just so people understand exactly what's happening here, and so that you understand that your Constitution hasn't really applied both in court, where they don't accept it as a defense, and in general with regards to your Congress and your government. I just want to read this excerpt from that congressional committee. Again, November 19th, 1973, from the U.S. Government Printing Office Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency, where it states, since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 presidentially proclaimed states of national emergency. Of course, this is old. In addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933, there are also the national emergencies proclaimed by Truman during the Korean conflict and Nixon as well. Now this is where it gets interesting. These proclamations give force to 470 provisions of federal law. These hundreds of statutes delegate to the president extraordinary powers, presidential directives, and presidential executive orders ordinarily exercised by the Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing matters. And here is the kicker. Quote, This vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. Let me read that again. This vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. This is directly from Congress. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways control the lives of all American citizens. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but that is directly from the congressional record. And that tells you what we've been in since 1933. That has not stopped, and Rima, you're absolutely correct when you say that Obama declared his national emergency because every president has to continue the national emergency in order to remain what this describes as basically king. So Obama's national emergency just happens to be the what you might call fake swine flu, which brings me to mind.
Which I have called the fake swine flu, and the inoculation of which was stopped, the mass inoculation of which was stopped by the 3.5 million emails that Health Freedom supporters sent when they took our action item. It's that important. Without that, we would not only have had the inoculation with God knows what in it, including enough squalene, according to two 1998 patents, to create permanent, irreversible, immune-mediated sterility in everyone, or in many people receiving the vaccine. But who knows what else? And because there was no mass inoculation, no pandemic was triggered, and we haven't had a serious influenza year since then, because people have said, hell no, I'm not putting that crap in my body. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's that important. Now, you were about to say something else, and I know Sharry has a great deal to say on this, as does Ralph.
Well, sure. I mean, one of the things that really struck me as I was reading this, someone else sent me this executive order that you've been talking about, dealing with the national emergencies. And I want to refer people, first of all, you asked me on here because of my film that I did, which is called Lethal Injection, the Story of Vaccination. And in that film, it discusses, specifically because it's primary research going straight to the source, it discusses the chemical and biological warfare program of government. And I want to refer people in this document that came out, this executive order, to section number 204. Number 204 simply states that it says chemical and biological warfare. The authority of the president conferred by section 104B of this act, 50 U.S. Code, is delegated to the Secretary of Defense. This authority may not be further delegated by the Secretary. So the president has just basically handed the entire chemical and biological warfare program over to the Secretary of Defense, who, by the way, used to be the director of the CIA, Mr. Leon Panetta. Now, what I want people to understand here is that the president is still fully responsible for all of the actions of anyone that he appoints, and that is the entire government. So, federal government, we elect one. We think we elect anyway on these voting machines, that we elect one person, and by default the vice president, but really we're only electing one person in government. Every single office in that federal government, well, just about, is then appointed under the president. And so if we're going to hold someone accountable, just like a CEO at a corporation, the manager is responsible, but ultimately the CEO of the corporation, very similar to Obama being the CEO of the United States Corporation, is responsible for all of the things that are happening. Just because it's delegated to someone else, just because the Federal Reserve does something, or because some other executive department does something, does not take the responsibility of that action away from the president. I want people to stick that in their heads, because we need to start thinking about how we're going to fix these things, and the way we're going to do that is to get rid of that CEO and unincorporate this whole mess of a government that we have.
Ralph, I want
Yes.
to ask you from a legal point of view how we unincorporate the government. And Sharry, I want to ask you from a bioacoustic point of view. And remember, folks, we have a wonderful course on radiation information and protection for yourself on April 1st that Sharry is going to be teaching, and you bet I will be attending. So I want to open the discussion on whether it is possible to unincorporate the United States and return to these United States. And Sharry, I want to ask you whether you have frequency related or other information that pertains to activating people in a sense of self-protection, because maybe what we need to do is send out a frequency packet that people can listen to cancel out the numbing and the dumbing from the fluoride and from the other toxins we've been exposed to. So how do we unincorporate and return to a constitutional republic?
Wow, what a big question. I wish I knew the answer. The only thing that I have been able to do with massive toxicities is to give people white light. And white light frequencies is exactly the same frequency.
Is she still on?
Hello, Dr. Rima. Is Sharry there?
The only thing I've been able to do, and then she, of course, went off air. Sharry, are you there?
I'm trying to be.
Oh, good. Okay, now you're back.
Good. And I don't want to lose the thread. People may not instantly see the relationship between what our guest, Clint Richardson, is talking about and what Sharry's talking about, but they're very deeply connected. Otherwise, we wouldn't be bringing them together. We've been numbed and dumbed by frequency, allowing us to accept the taking away of our basic bedrock of rights. And Clint is talking to us about exactly how that has occurred. We have to know exactly what's happening so that we can fight back in a peaceful way on every front. So, Sharry, please continue. You said the only thing you've been able to do for massive toxicity, and what we have here is social legal toxicity mediated by chemicals. The only thing you've been able to do is
use the frequencies of white light, which is the exact frequency of ATP, the very first chemical made when conception takes place. So we have a tone box together that we're running experiments on.
Isn't that also, Sharry, isn't that also the frequency of sky blue?
No.
No. All right.
Sky blue is a G, and it's the most neutral sound. But we ran some experiments here in the Department of Film. I've been teaching in there for about 20 years. And we took a bicycle squeaky wheel, and we changed the frequencies of that squeaky wheel so we could manipulate people's behavior with it. So ATP and the other nucleotides we have put together, but we haven't run enough experiments to see if that truly is what's going on or what we can do with it. To keep people in stasis when we can't get to them, we provide them what we call an overture box, and it's got the ATP and all of the nucleotides on it.
Now, what happens if we do a little experiment, Sharry? What happens if you provide me with one of those boxes, and I will do laboratory tests on toxic people? I will look for the variety of things that we're being toxified with, and then we will play the frequency for them and draw more blood or urine or whatever. You, of course, can do that too, but I think it would be interesting to have it done at multiple centers. Can we do that?
I would love it.
Outstanding. And if that works, then we will find a way to provide frequency packets, tone boxes, and other electronic means to specifically detoxify, perhaps uncalcify the pineal gland. This can be done because we are facing an onslaught that is designed to activate parts of us that we don't want activated and deactivate parts of us that we do. Clint, as the creator of the extraordinary video called Lethal Injection, which people should watch, everybody within the sound of my voice and my keyboard needs to know that Lethal Injection is a gripping, harrowing exploration into the mad and destructive world of vaccines. Let's talk about your perspective on the detoxification that we're undergoing, not only through the political toxicity that we began the show talking about, but also the vaccine toxicity. And if you could, tell us how they're connected.
Well, I got to tell you that what Sharry has been bringing forth here today was quite, it made my heart drop to hear it, because really this plays into the I can't tell you how much law, or at least what this structure that we call government, this series of corporations calls law, this U.S. code, for which they claim has authority over everything. And one of the most important aspects, again, is that biological weapons section in the U.S. Code, which is referred to in a major way. It's Title 50 of U.S. Code, and that is what is referred to over and over in this new presidential directive, executive order that we're talking about. I would just like to this is perhaps the wording of this will explain the complete corruption, not only political corruption but moral corruption, because we're really talking about here is we're talking about a government, and the government is not people. People are not running this government. Again, these are persons, these are corporate persons, a series of corporations, government having massive investments in every single pharmaceutical, medical, and every other corporation out there. This is my real forte is the comprehensive annual financial reports, and thus I made the Corporation Nation series of movies about just that, showing that government has such a major conflict of interest because it has such huge investments, stock investments in all corporations, Fortune 500, China, everywhere else. Every bank, everything that happens is because government has these investments, and also because they have these investments, it is the proxy shareholder, the main shareholder vote for what happens within those corporations. And that's a whole other can of worms, but very important to understand. So if you can watch the Corporation Nation, especially part 1 and 2, called The Great Pension Fund Hoax, it's very important to understand why this stuff is happening. And you'll find that every oil company, every bank, every pharmaceutical is literally the main stockholder is government. And so you have this corporate conflict of interest where the shareholder of these companies is also regulating the very companies that it's invested in. Again, that's a whole other can of worms, but absolutely imperative for people to understand.
I disagree with you, Clint. It is the same can of worms. What we are seeing now is the edict-based implementation of what Al Capp, the cartoonist who drew the Little Abner cartoon series, which was a powerful political commentary dressed up as a cartoon. What he said, and what he made a slogan that brought awareness to many, many millions of people through his daily cartoon, was what's good for General Bull Moose is good for the nation. And what we have here is General Bull Moose, the corporate head of Monsanto, of Halliburton, of every other mega international corporation, is good for the nation, not for the people. But as you said, the nation, the United States, is now the major proxy shareholder of the corporations, and the corporations are the major policy drivers of the nation. There is an inherent conflict of interest, not only between the regulators and the corporations, but between the welfare of we, the people, and the corporations. Corporations have a single bottom line: dominate the market at all costs, make money at all costs. You and I have a different bottom line: thrive, be healthy, rear our children in peace and prosperity, live our lives in safety, free from unwanted intrusion, and maintain our physical, social, ethical, moral, spiritual integrity, free of molestation and interference.
Oh, you idealistic, crazy woman.
I know.
That's. I mean, where do you come from saying things like that? The truth.
The old school. I'm saying that those are that we have that now. I'm saying we have two different agendas, just as the state and the corporations should have two different agendas, and now they have one because they are one. What I'm saying is that we have to seize our agenda. We have to move toward an implementation of our agenda. And if it takes deconstructing governmental regulation of the corporations and deconstructing corporate power, well, then I'm your gal.
Yeah. Well, what's important, I think, to understand, especially when, again, I stopped reading books and have been since just reading U.S. code and patents and all these types of government documents. And
you must be a delight at a dinner party.
Well, yeah, absolutely not. But I've gotten to the point where that's the case. It's pointless to read people's opinion when you can just go straight to the source. And so what I've come up with is it's a very simple concept that people need to grasp here, because again, we have an idealistic view of what government is. We say it's constitutional, when in actuality we all know there's no part of the Constitution that is being implemented at all in government whatsoever. Even when these guys get up and talk about the Constitution, it doesn't mean that the laws reflect it in any way. And so what you have to know is two things. A corporation, first of all...
Wait, go back. Wait, Clint, stop. That's what NSA wants you to do. Stop. You dropped off. There was no sound when you said, when of course we all know there's no part of the Constitution. You disappeared. So if you could repeat that and go on from there, I'd be grateful.
There is no part of the Constitution that is being applied in government as we speak. Now, these guys get up and talk about it, these presidents, senators, congressmen, but just because they're talking about it in Congress does not mean that it applies to the actual laws that they are passing.
Are we up there?
That's very important.
Wait, it happened again. These guys have no couth. They are so unsubtle.
We're off the air, really?
There is no part of the Constitution that is being applied to. That's as far as we got this time. Talk fast.
Wait a minute! It says that I'm broadcasting. I see a broad. Oh, let's check with the folks over here. All right, let's answer. Are we on or not?
I'm on. Can you? Panama Red Gun has.
Okay, good. All right. Well, just a little glitch along the way, folks. Just a little glitch along the way. Boy.
You guys are glitchy.
We're glitched.
Well, when you are glitched at every moment of maximal importance on every subject that challenges the corporate government hegemony, and it becomes a pattern, it gets to the point where it's funny. During our annual war council, we were being hacked, and we had people were Skyping in and saying, somebody's coughing right by the microphone. There's a hacking cough. They're going hack, hack, hack. Nobody was coughing in the room where the War Council was taking place. The listeners were so unsubtle. I mean, they're 19-year-old kids who are not in prison because the government cut a deal with them saying, tell you what, you work for us or you are going to prison. So somebody was going hack, 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 as if they were trying to tell us what was happening. So,
well, and
yes.
that's just perfect. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Again, is not just a politically corrupt system, but a morally corrupt system, and that is the definition of a corporation. A corporation cannot have morals, values, ethics, because it would affect the bottom line. You can't clean up an oil spill and force that company to spend billions of dollars cleaning up the Gulf. If you're the main shareholder, it would affect your bottom line. You see that you can't regulate these horrific medicines that the things they call medicines. No, you put this ridiculous commercial on television and show a bunch of trees or a bouncy ball while you tell people that the medicine's going to kill you if you take it, possibly. You see that you have this conflict of interest, but most important, I think, and this is the conclusion that I've come to, especially with my local police, my sheriff, that's been another whole can of worms that's been federally taken over, as have so many sheriffs across the land. But we have a situation where government doesn't really need the people anymore. For a while there, government was collecting all the tax and then investing all that money, but at this point, government investments are in the trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and that money is perpetually gaining in value just from the return on investment. And so at this point, government doesn't necessarily need people. It is so ultra powerful. And so at this point, my only conclusion is that the police, the municipal police, which incidentally, when you say municipal police, you're referring to a municipal corporation, which is what your city or county is, a municipal corporation. Mine is called the Salt Lake City Corporation. That is the Salt Lake government. You cross corporate lines, not city lines. But what I find is that the police now are strictly there to enforce city or municipal corporation code. They are not there any longer to protect and serve, and in fact have no interest in protecting and serving the people whatsoever. They are there, in fact, including the FBI and every other government federal agency, to enforce federal, local, and state laws, which are corporate codes, U.S. code and UCC code. And so we have a situation now where our police are actually protecting the entire corporate structure, from private corporations all the way to government corporations, from the people. So our police are actually now at the point where, unfortunately, they are no longer protecting us from them. They are protecting themselves. They're protecting the corporation, the government, and the entire Fortune 500 from the people.
And one has only to look at the police response to Occupy all over the world, Spain, Greece, the United States, Oakland, to see the truth of that. One has only to see the armamentation that is being provided to the police by the government, which is the corporate state. The massive wartime armaments that are being provided to protect the police from the rage of the people. And one recalls Thomas Jefferson's statement that government, I'm paraphrasing, that the Constitution is designed to protect not the government from the people, but the people from the government. We need protection from the government. This is
why presidential directives and executive orders are now replacing the Constitution, just like that document I read earlier says. In order to bypass the Constitution, they actually used the constitutions, just like they did in Germany and France, and every constitution ever written has that clause that says that it can be basically usurped with the declaration of war or declaration of emergency, the War Powers Act and all of that. And so that's what has happened, basically. you have a situation where the Constitution has been subverted. It has been utilized in a way as to completely distort and essentially nullify it. And so that's where we are, and that's where all this U.S. code is really coming from. Let me just, this is straight out of the documentary, the lethal injection documentary, and I think it's just so important to understand the wording of U.S. code. And again, Title 50 is what is referred to specifically in this new presidential directive. So Title 50, Chapter 32, Section 1520A is entitled Restrictions on the Use of Human Subjects for Testing of Chemical or Biological Agents. Sounds good so far. It says in Section A, it says prohibited activities the Secretary of Defense may not conduct directly or by contract. So this is what it can't do. Any test or experiment involving the use of a chemical agent or biological agent on a civilian population. Or 2, any other testing of a chemical agent or biological agent on human subjects. Now, keep in mind that a biological agent is just about anything you can think of, from vaccines to the chemical that we were talking about earlier with Sharry, to anything you can think of falls under the category of a biological agent. It can be a flu virus, it can be just about anything. It can be the most toxic of anthrax, anything you want. Okay? Now, Section B of this section says exceptions. So these are the exceptions to what we just read, because so far it sounds great. Secretary of Defense can't directly or by contract test any experiment on people. I mean, it sounds like a great thing. No biological agents tested on people, period. End of story. Except, in Section B, it says exceptions. Subject to these subsections, the prohibition in this subsection A, which we just read, does not apply to a test or experiment carried out for any of the following purposes. Any peaceful purpose that is related to medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. Well, that covers just about everything. Medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research, which that's just about anything you can think of. 2, any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons. So there's your vaccines, your so-called antidotes, or anything else you can think of. And 3, any law enforcement purpose, including any purpose related to riot control. So the exceptions for the Secretary of Defense to not use chemical weapons as an experiment on people or for any other purpose is basically everything. Any medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agriculture, industrial, research activity. So you see, when you actually go and you read the U.S. code, they really are exempting themselves from their own laws in just about every code that you find. There's codes in here that scare the heck out of me. Just, I mean, the wording of this specific thing, and again, I cover this in the movie, but for the reference, again, it's Title 50, Chapter 32, Section 1520A. I suggest people go and read that section because it literally applies to you. It's very, very scary. There's also... Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Clint. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's also a section on radiological dispersal devices, meaning just about anything that emits radiation, including the body scanners in the airports, and it does the same thing. It says the government cannot irradiate people, but the exception, it basically says that the radiological dispersal devices, including nuclear weapons or anything that emits radiation in a harmful way, it says that this law against it does not apply to conduct by or under the authority of the United States or any department or agency thereof, or B, conduct pursuant to the terms of a contract with the United States or any department or agency thereof. So any private corporation with a contract can literally irradiate anybody, any one of us at any time. That includes Raytheon, that includes Monsanto, all of these things. You see, the government is the main shareholder of the stock in these corporations. So how does that apply now to this new
new regulation,
crazy,
right? Well, what it does is it says not only can it be based on contract, but now the secretaries of these 6 privileged departments can dictate the contract.
Exactly.
Pure, complete command economy, pure fascist economic structure.
It actually goes on to say, as I was reading further into it, I'm just going to paraphrase, it actually gives the authority to CEOs of corporations. They have a CEO training, I can't remember what they called it exactly, but you'll read it, a CEO training course where they take the executives of these corporations, and they're actually training them to be government-trained I really don't even know how. Oh, it's called. Oh, here it is. Section 501.
I believe the appropriate term would be lackey, would it not?
Well, it's even worse. It's Section 501, which is Part 5, Employment of Personnel, and we're talking about the executive order, National Defense Resources Preparedness that you were talking about. Section 501 says National Defense Executive Reserve. There is now established the executive branch, a National Defense Executive Reserve, NDER, composed of persons of recognized expertise from various segments of the private sector and from government, for training for employment in executive positions in the federal government in the event of a national defense emergency. As you said, Rima, we're already in a national emergency. So they're talking about putting private corporations, private CEOs and executives in the executively appointed branches of government. Right.
Well, this is basically, it gives them the right to conscript anyone into any position in any company. Complete and total control.
Frightening as hell. That's, if you ask my opinion. I've never really said this before, but this thing, as you guys were kind of alluding to, is a red alert for me. This is a massive. This thing really puts everything that they've been doing in the past.
Wait. The sound disappeared again. So you said they're talking about taking CEOs of private corporations, and then you disappeared. So while we have you back, go for it again.
Well, actually, Rima, it was you, I think, who disappeared. Luckily, the people who were listening probably heard it all. But yes, please, Clinton, please repeat that. It was a critical point.
Section 501 in this executive order, National Defense Resources Preparedness, that you guys were talking about. Section 501, National Defense Executive Reserve, the NDER. There is established this NDER composed of persons recognized expertise from various segments of the private sector and from government, except federal employees or full-time federal employees, for training for employment in executive positions in the federal government in the event of a national emergency. And again, we've been in a state of national emergency since 1933, which bypasses the Constitution. We are in such trouble. And again, I'm raising a red flag, a big red alert here, because this executive order, you don't see many executive orders that are so detailed and enumerated in this way, with sections and letters and numbers and letters. This is a major play on the takeover and fascism, corporatism of what's happening. And this really just puts all of these past executive orders and everything else into one executive order. Basically,
I'm thinking about Lego blocks.
Yes.
Remember Lego blocks. I have been saying for some years now, how come they keep passing the same law over and over? When they passed the Warren Commission Act that said you could lose your citizenship and be brought before a military tribunal with no habeas corpus rights on October 17th, 2006, and then they passed the same with the Patriot Act. They basically set the stage for the same thing. And then with the NDAA, they set it again. They keep passing the same law. They keep setting out the same edicts, imperial edicts from the Forbidden Palace. How come they keep doing that, I keep saying. And it's like building a house of Lego blocks. If somebody takes away one of the Lego blocks,
the others
rest of
remain.
the structure
Exactly.
stands.
Yes, exactly.
Now I have with me in the office, from which apparently I periodically disappear, which is so interesting. I have two people who are listening avidly, one of whom has been chatting, and one of whom has been just sitting here with horror written all over his face. The first of those, the one of whom with horror written all over his face, is a man who has spent 32 years on active military duty, retiring as the head of the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM. That is General Bert, the president of the Natural Solutions Foundation, a true patriot, the highest ranking oath keeper, oath taker. And I am happy to say my husband, who is, by the way, fully recovered from his cataclysmic ski injury in Chile in August during the first vacation we've taken in I don't know how long, and we went dancing, contra dancing in Boston to celebrate that last month. Anyway, back to the point. He's sitting here and he has a look of what I can only describe as incredulity and horror on his face. And I'd like to ask him to come closer to the microphone and speak to us. You're a professional career military person, West Point graduate, out of a family where your dad was also a West Point graduate. You believed in the system. Tell us what's going on in your head and your heart right now, General Bert. I don't call him General Bert personally, but for the radio show I do.
Well, good morning to everybody, and Clint, thank you very, very much for all of the information that you have been dispersing, because it is ultra, ultra important for everybody, not only the people who are listening, but all of the people that the listeners will tell, and the listeners will tell, so that the word begins to get out to everybody.
And we will have a podcast. We're going to send out a special blast that people can forward with the audio file from this broadcast.
But I also want to thank Sharry. I don't know whether Sharry's still there,
No,
but I thank her also publicly for all of the contribution that she's making in the research and development of frequency, so that you have protection for a number of different issues. Now, back to the main issue here. I listen with horror to what's happening, and it's not just today's broadcast. Clint, what you've done is bring it totally into focus. But I listen with horror to all of the things that the government is doing, which I spent my entire life defending against. You know, I believed in the Constitution, I still do, and I watch it go out the window, step by step by step. Oh, we don't need this anymore. And we throw a piece of the Constitution out the window because it doesn't match exactly where the corporations are trying to take the government to. And the Constitution is being totally dismantled. Your rights, your freedoms, take freedom of speech. How many times have we been knocked off the net today because we were talking the truth to everybody and trying to get the truth out? Suddenly you can't be heard because somebody doesn't like what we're saying. Well, as I shudder at what's happening, and knowing that the key to keeping us in place are all of these national security memorandums and laws and regulations that allow the government to essentially do what the government wants to do. And oh, by the way, the government is the one that is taking your freedoms away. So, bit by bit, we're being put, but the people, you, the people, me, all of us, the people, are being put into essentially a servitude stature. National emergencies are more important. Therefore, your rights are no longer important. And out the window they go. Go back to 9/11. 9/11 occurred, and suddenly the United States could not wait to go to war. The president at the time, President Bush, couldn't wait to get us into war in Iraq. Yet, why were we in such a rush to go to war? Because war should be the last choice. Well, that's exactly what's happening now. We're going into using the same regulations that allowed us to go to war immediately. We're using those same things to allow you to become slaves.
And now the war, they said, the battlefield is everywhere. It's your home street.
Everywhere.
And so where are we now? We are at war. The government is at war against us. I'm sure that people are beginning to see that our use of the term war has been declared against us, and our creation of a war council, an annual war council, is not metaphoric.
And it's time to wake up.
Clint, what do you think about this?
I think you're. Yes, it's an honor, sir, to have you in our presence. Thank you. I will say this though. You're absolutely correct, except in your terminology, because war is a specific thing that is generally, or used to be generally, declared by Congress. And at this point, because of these executive orders, right, there is no war. We've not actually had a declared war since 1940. Well, since World War II, basically. That was the last declared war. At this point, we're in a constant state of nation building and occupation, basically. There is no war. The real war, as you suggest, is actually against the people of Earth, including the people of America. And that dates back to essentially when the war powers was changed, and when enemies of the state were changed to the not just actually changed to the persons of the United States, as opposed to people that were not United States citizens. It's now United States citizens as well. What I really want to do, though, is to make people understand, because this has been a very hard thing for me to break free of, which is the conditioning that we've all gone through that says that the Constitution, since we've been alive, has been the law of the land, and it just unfortunately isn't the case, and that's the hardest thing to break free of. As soon as that first national emergency was declared, again, it bypassed the Congress. So let me just read congressional record again. This is Congressman James M. Beck speaking in 1933. Quote, "I think of all the damnable heresies that have ever been suggested in connection with the Constitution, the doctrine of emergency is the worst. It means that when Congress declares an emergency, there is no Constitution. This means it's death." Still quoting, "It is the very doctrine that the German Chancellor is invoking today in the dying hours of the parliamentary body of the German Republic, namely, that because of an emergency, it should grant to the German Chancellor," we're talking about Hitler, "absolute power to pass any law, even though the law contradicts the Constitution of the German Republic. Chancellor Hitler is at least frank about it. We pay the Constitution lip service, but the result is the same. But the Constitution of the United States, as a restraining influence in keeping the federal government within the carefully prescribed channels of power, is moribund, if not dead. We are witnessing its death agonies, for when this bill becomes a law, if unhappily it becomes a law, and it did, quote, there is no longer any workable constitution to keep the Congress within the limits of its constitutional power. So what, unquote, so what we're saying is exactly what James M. Beck, the Farm Bill, 1933, was passed more than 3-1. And the emergency was declared by Roosevelt. Bush declared a national emergency for 9/11. Clinton declared his national emergency. I can't remember what it was for. So one of the countries that he invaded without congressional approval. We're talking about a situation here where we've all been duped from high school, from our military training, any kind of training, that the Constitution is the law of the land, and it just isn't the case because it has been usurped by the state of emergency. And that, again, brings us back to this this newest declaration by the president, who is acting as king, essentially. So, no, there is no war. That's the problem. There's no war. The only war is against the people, and the military and the police at this point have really been turned into agents for this corporate structure to protect it from the people. And killing people is just one of the ways in which it does that. Families, women, and children. And that's the unfortunate truth. And I think that's probably what you're speaking to, sir, when you say that you're disappointed.
Clint, you're absolutely correct. And the only reason that I used that word war was to wake people up, because it's time for them to get awake and listen and then take action, legal action, and that requires a lot of voices.
Wait. How do you take legal action? We have another voice here. We have another researcher who loves the details in the same way that we do, and I'm so happy, Clint Richardson, that you are our guest today. Your film, Lethal Injection, and your series, The Corporation Nation, are truly, truly important contributions to our understanding, as is your discussion today. We have another researcher, Panama Red Gonzo, who's also detail-oriented and diving into the same complexities and corruption that you are, and he just displaced General Bert from the seat closest to the microphone, second closest, because they can't displace me. I fight too fiercely. Panama Red Gonzo wants to say something, and you can tell us about your new website, which is quite remarkable.
4 days ago, not quite 4 days ago, I launched a new website. It's still technically pre-launch, coverthistory.com. It's not quite 4 days old, but there's over 300 news articles up there, as well as over a dozen documents and links to about 2,000 other documents and collections of documents. The problem that we have with taking legal action to stop these people is it's now illegal to protest. They are making that more and more illegal. Not only do we have the Ron Paul supporters arrested yesterday and the caucus shut down because, well, they were doing what people do at a caucus. They were arguing and debating. So they called the police from 3 different jurisdictions came and arrested them, and they shut down the caucus without any delegates being elected. Then you have the so-called trespass bill, which makes it a major crime to essentially protest. If you go to a government building, that is now a highly punishable offense.
No, if you go to a government building and you say something that opposes public policy when public officials are there.
Or if public officials are going to be there. Or if you protest, because one of the additional provisions of the so-called trespass bill is that if you do something that will disrupt or derail proceedings, regardless of where you are, that is an identical offense. And it is the goal of every protest. It is the goal of every petition. It is the goal of almost every editorial and commentary to have an effect on government proceedings, to disrupt it. You want to change what they are going to do, and that is now an offense under the trespass bill. a little while ago, Dr. Rima brought up the Lego blocks analogy. Why do they keep passing the same basic bill over and over again? They are incremental increases so that they can slowly build it up. It's, well, the NDAA isn't really much of an expansion over what we had before. So why are you complaining? That's true. That is one of the reasons they do it. The two other reasons are it makes it almost impossible to challenge what they're doing, because you cannot just challenge one law, one executive order, one etc. You have to challenge a dozen or more in order to try and stop them from taking any specific action.
Well, you said one important word, which is incrementalism, and I think that it really takes the cake, because you can't just tell people that they have no constitution after you taught them that they had it in school. So you have to take all of these things and slowly build them up in the law books, in the U.S. Code anyway, incrementally, so that the change occurs and you don't notice that the grass has grown above your head, basically. Instead of just saying, well, we declare this national emergency and all the past and present executive orders and other completely unconstitutional things are now law. You do it in a way, because you know people aren't reading U.S. Code, you do it in a way that you slowly introduce the thing that already exists. It's really quite clever, and these guys are very, very smart. Anyone who says Bush was an idiot or Obama's stupid is really the idiot. I mean, that's the unfortunate reality.
They are. They're missing what they're actually trying to do. They're taking them at face value when they say freedom, etc. And there is a third reason for this kind of incrementalism, I think, and passing essentially the same bills over and over again, is they almost never act on the most recent one, because that's the one that everyone is paying attention to. If everyone is screaming about the NDAA, they're free to go ahead and act on the Patriot Act to its full extent, which we're now seeing that they're doing. We've got congressmen and representatives who are raising hell over it and saying Americans would be shocked if they knew how this was being used. But everyone is focused on the NDAA, and now everyone is being focused on this executive order. And we should be.
Hello, are you there? Clint, are you there? Dr. Rima?
I am here, actually.
All right, very good. We just had it just sort of went off. Let's see if we can, there's a problem with this call, it says. We are still broadcasting, folks. And, folks, we are in the last, and it seems that if I do this, my iPad seems to bring Rima back on. There have been many solar storms recently. Dr. Rima's connection to the internet is literally over a wireless dish that aims from the top of the Natural Solutions Center building in Volcan, Panama to the... there she is, back on. All right, Dr. Rima, 9 minutes left before the program is over.
Okay. The most important 9 minutes, and Clint, I would very much be honored if you would come back, and we'd like to work to talk with you off air and work with your knowledge and your skills. All right, gentlemen, we have.
Yeah, we need you to join, Clint. We need you to join the Free World Network. In fact, all you people who are listening to this and on the chat, you got to go to freeworldnetwork.org and join the Free World Network. Very important. We have to build that network.
Yes, absolutely. And Clint, I would like it if you would create a group on Free World Network. That's our own social network. We own it. Of course, people are monitoring it, but they're not controlling it. We are. So how do we take back our own governance of our own bodies, our own lives, our own self? How do we correct this monstrous set of wrongs that have been piled upon each other for decades and decades? How do we do that?
Well, boy, as Sharry said, that's a huge question. Now, I had a sort of
it's what I do.
I had sort of a care and fancy free little idea that I would run for president with the intention that if you're voting for me, you're voting basically to unincorporate, get rid of all these executive orders. First step I would do is to declare a state of non-national emergency. So I put together
I like that.
website.
I like that.
But of course, I'm actually at the point now where I'm actually having to go get some part-time work and having to cut down on my activities. But I put up a website together called Clint4P, CLINT, the number 4 and the letter P.com, just as a sort of write-in candidacy, with a lot of ideas on there for a lot of different things. And I'm, to be honest, what I've come to the conclusion of, and it's a very hard conclusion, a very hard thing to actually get your head wrapped around, but we're always talking we're always saying that we're afraid of the collapse of the global economic system or even the national economic system. But when we say that, do we really think about what we're saying? Because we're talking about, well, hey, what if Walmart collapses? What if Bank of America collapses? Wouldn't that actually be good for small business? Wouldn't that actually, is the collapse of the economy and the dollar, keeping in mind that the Federal Reserve is the dollar, and every time that you hold a sign up saying end the Fed and then going and spending $1 bill in buying a Coke, you're actually contributing to your own slavery by spending those dollars. Isn't the collapse of the system sort of like a phoenix rising from its own ashes? Don't we need to sort of start letting some of these things fail? Too big to fail?
Too corrupt to fail. We have been urging people to grow their own food, because if the system fails, well, the system has failed. If the chicken stops running around because the head's already gone, what do people need? They need food, they need water, and they need the basic physical securities. In cold climates, they need heat. They need some minimal amount of transportation. But if the economy fails and you don't have food, you are in big trouble. Start growing food. If you live in a cold climate, start growing it in a corner of your living room or a closet with a grow light. Put a generator in your house. Make sure that you can, a solar generator would be nice for the most minimal things, for your computer and your refrigerator. You really don't need a whole lot more.
To add to that, there's also such a thing, and it's a very lost art. Something like 93% of the winter season seeds have been just displaced out of the system. There used to be, people used to start growing or planting in November and harvesting in April, right when the breadbasket would be empty. There's all kinds of things you can actually plant in the winter, and they're very happy in the winter season with frost and snow. So there are also winter vegetables that I think that needs to be talked about and have a resurgence.
That's a wonderful, wonderful point. And I think what we need to do is do some focus specifically on that. Are you an expert in winter seeds?
I am not. I've been listening to a few interviews about it. People who can't, you can barely even find some of the things anymore. Some guy had to actually contact a seed bank in one of I think Finland, in order to just get one form of onion. Otherwise, it doesn't exist anywhere on the planet anymore. And again,
Would
it's like...
you send us those links?
Sure.
Absolutely. That we have a site called foodfreedomejournal.org. Foodfreedomejournal.org. And I have been making a lot of videos, which I presumably will call upon Panama Red Gonzo over here to do some editing for, so that we can put them up. We have a lot of information. But the more we can be self-sustaining and self-informing, the stronger we become. So there's the food issue. Okay, what about constitutionality and legality? How are we going to fix this? Panama Red Gonzo is attempting to speak, and he wants me to stop in order to allow that. Yes, go ahead.
The first step to that kind of freedom is remembering that you are already free. The system does not exist. They will tell you, and they will lie when they say this, that power grows out of the barrel of a gun. This is not true. Power grows out of consent. Coercion grows out of the barrel of a gun. The money that you have in your wallet right now is worthless. Take out a dollar bill or even $100 bill and look at it. Ask yourself, what is the most valuable part of it? The answer is the microscopic bits of cocaine that have become trapped in the still wet ink because the ink never dries. It is worthless. If you want to be free, then act as a free person. Be a free man, so to speak. Trade, barter, grow your own food. Don't believe them when they tell you that you are a slave. Don't believe them when they tell you that the only way to trade or to get things is to use their fake currency. Because that currency right there is control.
Yeah, you said the most important word of any legal term that you can know, and that's consent. And you need to know that all U.S. code is actually prima facie law. Specific ones are actually listed, including the Federal Income Tax Code, Title 42 and I believe 28 are prima facie law. Title 50, prima facie law. The Congress, Title 2 and Title 5 are prima facie law. Prima facie means presumed consent. That means that everything that they do, everything they pass, including what the president passes in these executive orders, presume that you, the people, anybody listening, consent to that law. The only way not to have that law affect you is to verbally and in writing not consent. That's it. That's the only weapon you really have when it comes to this.
Certainly, you got to assert your rights as best you can. Unfortunately, as we know, it's no longer lawful to resist an unlawful arrest and all that sort of stuff. So it's harder and harder to assert one's rights in a society in which the courts don't even use the word right anymore. It's interests. It's the government's interests weighed against your interests, you know. There's no inalienable rights. None of that stuff exists.
I want to point out one last thing. When you read the habeas corpus in the Constitution, it does not list it as a right. It lists it as a privilege, and that's probably the most important thing you can...
But a writ, how can a writ be a right?
Exactly.
You know,
it says it's a privilege.
Yeah, I know, but how can a writ be a right? A writ is a provision, is a procedure.
Right,
a writ is a procedure in court. That's all it is.
Exactly. You cannot legislate a right. The only right you will ever have is what you fight for. Period.
Got it.
End of story. No written document can ever declare a right. Only you can declare a right.
That's a very, very important concept. Panama Red, we call them Panama Red for short. Panama Red tells us that it is becoming illegal in Arizona to exert passive resistance to arrest. That means if you just go limp and sort of lie there so that they have to work to pick you up, you've committed a crime.
It means, what's hilarious about that is such a contradiction, such a paradox, because you can actually be arrested for resisting arrest. And then when you ask, what was I being arrested for, there's no answer. You're being arrested for resisting arrest. It makes no sense. It's a paradox.
Well, you know, I want to point out to our listeners that in a fascist state, and it doesn't matter whether you call it communist or socialist or a phony republic, it doesn't matter. The state have merged. In a fascist state, enough laws and regulations are passed so that it becomes impossible not to break those laws. Everyone is guilty of something all the time. So through selective enforcement of these insane regulations and laws and prima facie consent assumed to all of them, you are guilty. You are not guilty until proven innocent. You are just guilty. And you can be subjected to, quite literally, anything because you are guilty of something or several somethings. Let's talk about the FDA Food Modernization Bill. The FDA, which our efforts, our combined efforts of all the food-focused patriots in this country, delayed the passage of for 13 months, and then it was sneaked through by congressional consent at the very last minute by our spineless, gutless, worthless Congress of the United States. That bill says that the Department that food security is now under the Department of Homeland Security, which has the authorization to promulgate secret regulations which every food producer, food handler, food manufacturer, food distributor is required to comply with. But since they are secret regulations, they don't know what they are. This is the quintessence of the fascist, you're always guilty state. Because even if you're not guilty, they can say that there's a regulation that you broke that they can't tell you about, and that makes you a terrorist or something. And you are now a guilty person. And since the corporations and the state have merged, you're guilty of something that violates the bottom line of the corporation.
Well, this is something I
not
think Ralph...
the bottom line of the state.
I think Ralph can attest to, because Ralph, if I'm not mistaken, you're an attorney, correct?
Retired attorney, but yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, basically, the entirety of law, or at least of prima facie code, relies on the fact that there is a such thing as a victimless crime, meaning that there's really no plaintiff. That the only thing that is hurt, or person, which in this case means a corporation, that is hurt is the state or the communist corporation. This is all.
It's all based on the theory that you're violating the king's peace, of course.
Yeah, so you can actually go into a court situation if it's a
I would
municipal
like to
court
open
situation.
both the phone line. You need to give your phone number out.
Sure. All right, folks. Anybody? Yeah, let's take.
Two questions.
Right.
Specific question and the specific suggestions for action. We know what the problem is. It's been articulated beautifully. We know what the dangers are. They have been articulated beautifully. And now let's take your questions and let's take your specific tactical and strategic suggestions.
Okay, Dr. Rima, I've posted my phone number. I posted the phone number on the chat. It is 973.
Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me, Dr. Rima?
Now I can.
All right. I just posted my phone number on the
Can you
chat.
give your phone number?
I just posted my phone number on the chat, and I'll give it verbally now. 973.
Now I can't hear you again. Is Ralph on?
I'm on.
Yeah.
Let's see if we're still broadcasting. Let's see if we're still broadcasting here. I'm not really sure. Yes, it says we're still broadcasting. Now, folks, we're extending the program a bit because we were off for several minutes. We are broadcasting again.
Do we have?
And yes, let's see if this is a hello. Are you calling in for the Dr. Rima Reports? Good. Well, then you're on the air. Who's calling, please? You can give us an assumed name if you'd like.
I prefer the real one.
Okay.
My name's Jeff Lewis. I'm National Director of the Patriot Coalition. And Dr. Rima just asked for things people can take for action. Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, and our General Counsel, Richard Fry, and I have spent over 300 hours digging into the NDAA, Geneva Conventions, Hague Conventions, Constitution, and prepared resolutions that state and local law enforcement, state legislators, county commissioners can introduce to interpose themselves between we the people and a rogue federal government. Regarding the NDAA.
That is excellent. This is something we really want to know about. Can you give me your website so I can type it into the chat window for the people who are listening, who are on that end?
The Intolerable Acts.
Oh yes, the Intolerable Acts. Exactly. I recall that. So it's www.intolerableacts.org or .com?
.org.
All right, folks, the intolerableacts.org. Our caller is Mr. Lewis is one of the officers in the organization, and he's telling us, and it was a little bit breaking up there for a minute. Let's ask him to do that again. Tell us your organization name, and you mentioned the Oath Keepers. Of course, General Bert is, we believe, the highest-ranking Oath Keeper.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Dr. Rima. Go ahead, Dr. Rima. We can hear you. I think she can't hear us.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The organization is the Patriot Coalition and the Oath Keepers. It's a joint project between the Oath Keepers, Founder Stewart Road.
I'm not able. Can you hear me?
Coalition.
Can anybody hear me?
Hold on a second. Let me Skype Dr. Rima that we can hear her.
Oh, good. Unfortunately, I missed the entire comment. No need to repeat it, Ralph. Maybe you can just. Oh, you can hear me in capital letters. You can hear me. That's wonderful. Hi, NSA. How you doing today? You really need to get a bit more subtle.
Let's go back to our caller, Dr. Rima. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That's good. Let's go back to our caller who is explaining to us that he's part of a joint project between the Patriot Coalition and the Oath Keepers. And I'm sorry, you were about to give us some more details, so go ahead.
Yes, sir. We got together back in December and started doing our research. And there's several resolutions out there that people can take for action. They'll go to theintolerableacts.org and click on their state. It'll take them to their state page where they can get the resolutions for state legislators, for their sheriffs, for county commissioners, and for some states we've even got some GOP resolutions that have been introduced. Representative Charles Key in the Oklahoma legislature introduced it February 3rd. Representative Glenn Bradley in North Carolina will be introducing it next month. We've had several county commissioners and sheriffs across the country that are adopting our resolutions to interpose themselves and make a statement regarding the repeal of sections 1021 and 1022 of the NDAA. People have to get engaged. They have to engage their members of Congress and their state legislators and their sheriffs. And if they say they're too busy dealing with voter ID laws or redistricting or whatever it is, you ask them what they're doing that is more important than repealing a law that eviscerates the majority of the Bill of Rights. As Congressman Paul said, the
here's what I
does to the Fifth Amendment what the Patriot Act did to the Fourth Amendment. Yes, ma'am.
Here's what I would like to do. I would like to bring you, Jeff, and you, Clint, together on a webinar, perhaps a series of webinars where we take one issue at a time and we look at them and we give people specific information, education, and then specific actions. And I would like to do this as part of a new program that we're creating called healmedrrima.com. We're building a website that is focused on healing all of the issues. There are physical issues, there are vaccine injury issues, there are liberty issues, and I would like to create these webinars, the Freedom Series, just as we're going to have a diabetes series and we're going to have an environmental toxicity series, because it's all the same and it's all intentionally interlinked at the level at which it's being perpetrated. So we have to see the linkages too. I'd like to invite the two of you and Panama Red Gonzo, Ralph and General Bert. I'd like to invite us to create a series of educational programs that reach out to the widest possible audience. Clint, your audience. Jeff, your audience. Our audience. Panama Red Gonzo's covert history audience. And I'd like to start using the power of the combination of our awarenesses to create specific educational materials to reach out and to mobilize people. I think it's that important. What do you say? By the way, Ralph and I have not talked about this, because nor has General Bert, because I just created this initiative. What do you think, gentlemen?
Oh, I think poor Bert. Bert must just put up with so much.
Hey, I think that we need to use the Free World Network this new online system that we're developing, I think we need to use it to help a lot of different organizations coordinate what they're doing and communicate with each other. And we certainly want to invite everyone to do that. We really need to join in with all the groups that are fighting the same battle. So yeah, let's cooperate.
I appreciate the opportunity. I couldn't say no to something like that. So thank you, and absolutely, just let me know.
Outstanding. We will make that happen. We're fighting for our very lives. That's simple. That's the basic structure. We're fighting for our lives. We are fighting to stay afloat in a sea of fascist feces.
Right.
I would point out that the United States government now defines organic agriculture, or it now calls organic agriculture by a new term. They call it feces-based agriculture. And of course, that's bad. The only thing that's good is chemical-based agriculture, where you know exactly how you're poisoning the food and the soil and the atmosphere. I would suggest that we're looking at feces-based regulation.
On that same note, does the FDA now classify Pepsi as a fetus-based beverage or an
a fetus-based, right? Oh gosh, did you see that article on Natural News about Pepsi using flavorings that are somehow derived from aborted fetal tissue? That's weird.
The flavorings are not derived. The research is done on aborted fetal tissue cells, and that seems to be okay. Now, I can't quite figure out why stem cell research is not, but aborted fetal cell flavor research is okay. But then again, what do I know?
Well, you know, about the last half hour of lethal injection, my vaccine documentary goes into the fact that they actually grow vaccine cell substrate cultures on human aborted fetal tissue, and in the actual inserts that go with the vaccines, it explains to you that when you're taking these vaccines, certain vaccines, that you're actually injecting parts of that fetal tissue into your body because you can't filter it out. It was actually a way of saying, look, okay, maybe you're not convinced by the science, maybe you're not convinced by it, but at least look at it this way. These guys, they're growing these cells to make vaccines literally on human aborted fetal tissue that is cloned and redistributed and then they're injecting it into your children, into your body. So you're literally getting pieces.
The new adult vaccination schedule has just come out from the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC. Don't think that this is just a child's problem. Let me point out as a physician that when your body meets protein that it doesn't recognize, it attacks it. And if that protein is similar to the protein that makes up you, it will then continue to attack it. So every time you inject, for instance, a Gardasil vaccine that contains, we now know, DNA from the actual virus, although it was said that it couldn't possibly. Every time you inject a vaccine that contains fetal tissue or monkey tissue or whatever, DNA and protein, you are asking your body to develop an autoimmune reaction or to develop a cancer or to develop some other lethal problem or sublethal problem. You are asking your body to defeat its ability to survive. Thus, I would suggest that any sane human being would refuse to take any vaccination under any circumstances. This is of enormous importance.
Dr. Rima, are you with us? This is of enormous importance. Silence.
Yeah, I completely concur. In fact, I went over this in great detail with the horses. The way that they sterilize horses is actually to inject. When you say the word vaccinate, it's simply to vaccinate something is simply to inject somebody with something. That's the term vaccination. And so when they're sterilizing horses, they're actually using what's called zona. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name. Zona pellucida, which is the ovaries of pigs. And so they're injecting female and male horses with sexual organs of similar nature. And your body then starts developing antibodies for its own reproductive organs. This is how they sterilize 90% of the horses in the wild, free-roaming horses.
Gee, do you think they're treating us? Do you think they're treating us as a wild species that needs to have its reproductive organs under government control?
Well, absolutely. That's exactly what they're doing in these vaccines. When there's a 2,500% increase.
I want you to remember that under the FDA, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Dr. Rima.
Okay, I want you to remember that under the new FDA regulation, and we've heard that regulation has the force of law, we've known that for a long time, under the new FDA regulation, your stem cells are unapproved drugs. The ones that your body produces, the ones that cause healing and regeneration, the ones that allow you to stay healthy and alive, your stem cells are now considered to be drugs. Unapproved. Untested.
And unfortunately, it's something like 40% of your genes are also patented at this point. So you don't even own the genes in your body, technically. So, I mean, it's getting ridiculous. It really is.
Indeed. Well, folks, Dr. Rima, I need to point out also that it's now 12:19, so we're 19 minutes beyond the usual end time. And I know we want to extend the program a bit today because we were off the air a while, but perhaps it's time to begin to wrap up.
All right, and in wrapping up, first of all, I want to thank all of our contributors. Clint Richardson, you have been a wonderful, wonderful source of information. Jeff Lewis, you also have been an important contributor. Panama Red Gonzo, thank you. Sharry Edwards, thank you. There are so many of us with so much accumulated wisdom. Now we have to act, and we have to, let me say it again, we have to act peacefully. We have to act lawfully, whatever that still means. Ralph, of course, you are one of my great heroes, and General Bert as well. I want to remind you that if you have investment money, if you still have some assets and you want to protect them and you want to expatriate them, by the way, you need to go to www.fundfornaturalsolutions.org. We have acquired and are accumulating a portfolio of tipping point projects. Yes, you'll make some money. Of course you will. But you will also make a difference. Those tipping point projects are where you want to invest your money. I mean, why would you invest your money with Monsanto? Why would you invest your money with Halliburton or with G or whatever the hell Blackwater is called now? Why would you do that if you care about freedom? You're going to become an investor of conscience. I strongly suggest that you move your IRA, you move your 401. It's not a 401 anymore, it's a 201 or a 101. That you take your conventional resources and you do something that matters in this, the
critical moment. In this, the critical moment that we find ourselves, Dr. Rima, this is the critical moment. You know, if this is not what is, and that's what the message of this program is for all of you folks, this is the critical moment. We got to pay attention now.
Let me just put my
and it's also the moment
I was
to ask
paid $85,000 a year to be a part of the propaganda machine, and I gave up that job to do what I'm doing right now. So put your money, somewhere besides what's going to make you a profit without conscience. Everybody needs to get this type of crisis of conscience. Everybody needs to wake up in that way.
Right.
Exactly. And Jeff, would you like to make a final closing statement for this program? We will be working together.
Yes, ma'am. I just sent you and Ralph and Gonzo a couple emails. We absolutely have to. What he just said, it's a critical moment. We are on the event horizon of losing every freedom and liberty we have, and we have to. It doesn't matter what else you're working on. If you don't have your freedom, you can't work on solving any problems.
You got it. Exactly.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Thank you,
All right.
folks.
Next week, we'll be back, and in the meantime, we'll be putting together the HealMeDrRima.com programs that we're talking about. Freedom is indivisible. Health extends beyond nutrients and cells to our body politic as well as our physical body. Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you, Panama Red Gonzo. You've been listening to the Dr. Rima Reports. Oh, yes, coffee, www.valleyofthemooncoffee.org. Clean, delicious, Health Freedom's own coffee. New crop is in. Best coffee on the planet, I do believe. Thank you.
Sneaking up on our freedoms, destroying our health, shredding the Constitution, taking away our wealth. But we're the men and women following freedom's trail.